have disbanded the Assembly's UKIP group. These members have formed a new group on the London Assembly, and with immediate effect it is called Brexit Alliance Group, BAG. Peter Whittle is leader of that group.
Oh my God. Is that legal?
Yeah, indeed it is. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest, please, other than those which are already set out? Thank you very much. Do you want to raise a point of, I have notice of a point of order. As Assembly Member Bailey.
So the GL Act 4.4. Sorry. I'd like to raise a point of order in accordance with the GLA Act 4.4. This morning the Mayor released a press release talking about he had published 2 landmark strategies. This is against our rules because it hasn't gone through the committee process. So it should be going through this first before you can publish those strategies.
Would you like to comment on that, or should I ask Secretariat to comment on the legality or otherwise?
Well, I'll wait for chair this from the Secretariat before I comment. I think it's pretty nice to do.
Okay, I thought
Well,
so.
I can assure you it's against the rules.
I think it's probably for the Mayor and colleagues to comment on compliance with the GLA Act, Chairman.
Yes. Are any of you able to comment on as to why you haven't complied with the Act?
Well, Chair, that's not quite what the Secretariat said. I'll look into the point raised. I'm not aware of what time the press release went out, but I'm happy to look into it.
Let's be clear, you have not complied with the Act.
No,
No,
you don't have a conversation.
No.
Assembly Member Bacon.
To assist, Chairman, the Act reads... I'm not making a point of order, I'm just commenting. Do I need to stand up for this?
Yes, please.
I'm happy to do so. The Act reads, the Mayor must not publish the strategy, or in the case of the housing strategy, submit the draft to the Secretary of State if, within the period of 21 days beginning the day on which the copy is laid before the Assembly resolves to reject the draft. Well, we haven't voted on it yet. That won't happen until later. So a press release timed at 9:32 this morning, which it was, is extremely presumptuous. What he could have said in the press release is that this is subject to the approval of the London Assembly, and that would satisfy the Act, but it didn't say that, so it clearly doesn't.
Would you like to satisfy the Act by saying subject to the approval of the Assembly, Mr Mayor?
Chair, I'm not aware what time the press release went out, but if it assists the Assembly, I'm happy to ask those listening to make sure the press release is amended to say subject to it being approved by the Assembly.
All right.
But I'm simply not aware what time the press release went out, if it's gone out or whatever.
Well, we haven't voted, so it's in advance of us voting.
So I can hear some mumbling.
Yes.
Well, we haven't voted, so it's in advance of us voting. It's a discourtesy Assembly, Mr Mayor. You know that full well.
Yes. Well, I think that the Mayor has complied with the request that he says that the publication is subject to the approval of the Assembly. So I really think that that meets the bill. I'm sure you won't do it again, Mr Mayor. Right, can we now please go to the Mayor's draft cultural strategy. The purpose of today's meeting is for the Assembly formally to receive, and in accordance with section 42B of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 as amended, to consider the Mayor's draft cultural strategy. Our guests are the Mayor, Justine Simons, Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative Industries, Debbie Weeks-Bernard, Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement, Shona Manson, Assistant Director, Culture and Creative Industries, and Simon Cooper, Sports Manager. I will begin by asking the Mayor for an opening statement regarding his draft strategy. The Assembly will then receive an opening statement from Susan Hall, Chairman of the Assembly's Economy Committee, regarding that committee's response to the draft strategy. Mr Mayor.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Assembly. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to discuss our culture and sport strategies and to respond to any questions that the Assembly may have. As Mayor, I see both culture and sport as so much more than just nice to haves. They both matter. Not just because culture and sport reflect London and who we are, but because they do so much to shape us as a city. Take culture. Our culture and creative industries are not only vital to our economic success, but to the well-being of Londoners. We're lucky to live in one of the most culturally rich cities on the planet, with world-class institutions and globally renowned talent. Our strategy is about protecting and enhancing these assets but also about ensuring that more people can access culture and the huge benefits it can bring. Far too many Londoners are still missing out. I want all Londoners, regardless of age, faith, race, gender, class or sexuality, to have the opportunity to engage and interact with our amazing culture. That's why I'm working hard to expand access to culture into every corner of our city. Because we know that culture has the power to inspire young Londoners and transform their prospects, supporting them to reach their full potential. And crucially, we know that we can use culture as a tool to steer young Londoners away from crime and gangs and towards education and employment. I'm proud of what we've already achieved. This includes developing London's nighttime economy, using the London Plan to protect culture and heritage, including pubs and music venues, establishing creative enterprise zones to provide artists and businesses with long-term affordable workspace, unveiling plans for East Bank, the biggest new cultural district established in London since 1851, and launching our Culture Seeds programme, which has already provided funding to grassroots organisations in 24 boroughs so that they can deliver cultural activities. We've also established the annual London Borough of Culture initiative, which will kick off in just a few weeks' time in Waltham Forest. Brent will then take the baton in time for the London fixtures of Euro 2020. The 2012 Olympic Games showed us what's possible when we bring culture and sport together, and I want Euro 2020 to be just as exciting. And this brings me to our sports strategy. We have some of those popular sports teams, internationally renowned events, and many of the finest sportsmen and women. Like culture, we have a lot to be proud of when it comes to sport, but there's scope for us to do even better. My aim is to make our city the undisputed sporting capital of the world by continuing to host the biggest and best events, but also to get more Londoners involved by supporting grassroots sport. This is vital to nurturing the next generation of sporting talent, keeping Londoners fit and building links between our diverse communities. Time and again, I've seen the amazing impact sport can have in our communities and how it can transform the lives of young Londoners, giving them structure, purpose and a sense of direction when they might otherwise be dragged down a path that's not only bad for them, but for our society as a whole. Another thing that stands out for me with sport is its remarkable power to bring people together and break down barriers. That's why for the first time ever, I've made fostering social integration and building stronger communities a key goal. Chair, the development of our culture and sports strategies has been a massive task, and I'm grateful to all the stakeholders who've been involved. We now have an ambitious but also an achievable programme to make London an even better global capital of culture, as well as a city that can remain at the very top of our sporting game. I also, Chair, through you, want to thank the Assembly members and the Assembly for their support. I look forward to answering questions later on today.
Thank you very much. I now ask the Chairman of the Economy Committee, Assembly Member Hall, to make her statement.
Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of the Economy Committee, we welcome the culture and sports strategies. As it's widely recognised, London is the cultural capital of the world, with its wonderful diversity of offers across all artistic forms that reflect both our history and our cutting-edge intent. Culture makes a huge contribution to London's economy. The sector generates 47 billion each year, and 1 in 6 jobs in the capital is in the creative economy. It is therefore important that the Mayor does all he can to support a vital part of London's economy. We are pleased that the revised culture strategy has taken on board some of our key recommendations, including publishing a map of London's museum and heritage infrastructure across all boroughs, a robust methodology to measure the impact of the Culture Seeds microgrant programme, and a new commitment to boost volunteer infrastructure across London. However, we still have some concerns that will require the Mayor's attention. We want to see the strategy improve the access to culture for all Londoners, balance the concerns of residents with business interests as the nighttime economy expands, increase diversity in the workforce, and improve working conditions in the culture industry, ensuring that workers earn a decent wage and can safely get to their workplace. Turning to the sports strategy, London already has an incredible sporting infrastructure. We welcome the goal to make the most of this to attract world-class events to the city. And we also agree with the Mayor that sport is a powerful way to bring communities together. We are pleased that the final strategy includes some of our recommendations, such as an implementation plan with objectives, indicators and a timeline, clearer actions to remove the barriers that affect people on low incomes participating in sport, and a broader range of ways to define success beyond participation rates. But a number of challenges appear here again, and they include how to define and measure social integration and ensuring that grassroots initiatives funded through microgrants are good value for money. It is important that the Mayor does all he can to improve social and economic inclusion in the capital and boost the quality of life of millions of Londoners. It is therefore absolutely vital that the implementation of this strategy is properly monitored and evaluated. This is why the Economy Committee will, as a priority, be assessing progress with the implementation over the next 12 months. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the lead-off question, which will be followed after the Mayor's response by questions from other Assembly members. And the lead-off question is this: what has been done to strengthen the draft culture strategy as a result of the public consultation?
Well, Chair, before I do that, can I just say I welcome the comments from the Chair of the Economy Committee, and I take the challenge in the spirit in which they were intended, and we definitely take on the challenges that she's rightfully articulated in her opening. Thank you for that. Chair, I launched the draft culture section of my culture strategy at the Battersea Arts Centre in March of this year. My culture team has undertaken, as you've heard, significant community engagement. This included focus groups, open events and online consultations with diverse audiences. Almost 100 organisations took part in the consultation. In total, we received over 3,200 comments and feedback from stakeholders, including Londoners. Stakeholders said they wanted to work with us to deliver the strategy in partnership. Londoners made it clear they valued culture as an important element of their quality of life. They liked our broader definition of culture, as did the Economy Committee. They liked the focus on the grassroots and diversifying the workforce, and they wanted to see more about culture and health. Using the feedback, the following has changed. There is more now on culture and health. There is more on supporting outer London boroughs. There is more on stemming venue closures, including libraries, and there is support for deaf and disabled communities, something that Caroline Russell and Caroline Pigeon both raised in their responses. There is also more on improving workforce diversity and skills. Chair, I'm happy to take questions from the Assembly.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure whether it should be the Mayor or whether it should be Shona answering this. It's just some tidying up. Shona and I have been having a dialogue electronically around the budget for culture, which dates back to July, when the Oversight Committee had a report which claimed that the culture and creative industries budget had increased from £11 to £20 million per annum as a result of the Mayor's manifesto commitments. We queried that, we asked for where that was going to be in the budget line, and there's been a back and forth. And we had a definitive answer, I think it was last week, and Shona and I bumped into each other in the lift and had a chat about it. Just want to clarify a couple of things in it, because I've compared the table that you gave me with answers, I didn't know there were written answers to questions that my colleague Assemblymember Hall had asked, and there's some slight discrepancies in the numbers. So I just wanted to tidy those up. So, for example, the 17-18 budget, you've split it out, as we asked, between the Museum of London and the creative industries, not including that. For 17-18, it said that the budget was 6 million, and that's what your thing says. But the written response in October to Assemblymember Hall said that the Museum of London budget was 12.3 million, and your answer said 11.6, so a discrepancy of 700,000 there. And there are some others as well. So I suppose the long way of asking the question is what you submitted to me last week the up-to-date and accurate version, or is there some problem with the written answer?
If I may take that.
Yes, please.
The figures that we've submitted are the up-to-date and accurate version. What we've put forward to you is both expenditure and budget. I think really, as we go forward, what we should be looking at providing, what we've done is answer the Mayor's questions with the questions that were asked. And some of them related to expenditure and some of them related to budget. What we should do in the future is always look at historical expenditure for the past and always look at projected budget for the future. And what we will do is provide that. Going
Okay, so
forward.
it's the difference between budget and actuals then?
Yes.
Fine, okay, no problem. So I'm now going to just take from the answer that you've given me. The 1920 Revenue, Cultural and Creative Industries budget reduces from the 18-19 budget by £2.7 million. It goes down from 10.1 to 7.4. Why is that, and where are those savings being made?
It's to do with the timescale of projects. So we obviously are in the middle of our delivery period. London Borough of Culture will be taking off. We'll have creative enterprise zones, which we'll be announcing tomorrow. So there will be a peak in expenditure this year. And we've also seen some carry forward from last year, which is why there's a higher budget figure in 18-19. So it's really to do with the timing of projects and the grants.
Okay. So conclusion of this then, that the figures that were put in the Oversight Committee paper in July weren't accurate. I'm not saying they were intentionally inaccurate, they just weren't.
I have put my hand up. They were based on our in-year budgets, and really what we should always be referring to is the budget figure at the beginning of the year and the expenditure figure at the end of the year, and we will absolutely ensure we're doing that going forward.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification, so thank you for that. Mr Mayor, moving on, part of your strategy is around the nighttime economy. And I want to talk about the role of the night czar. I'm talking about the role, not the person.
Sorry, I can't hit. It's not you. It's the mics. Usually I can pick it up really well. It's probably the mics, Gareth. It's not
I'll
you.
try and speak a bit more loudly, but hopefully, it's probably this issue. Part of your strategy is the nighttime economy, and I think there's general support that is a key part of London's economy. I want to talk to you about the role of the night czar, and it's the role I'm talking about, not the person occupying the position. Do you see it as a long-term position?
Yeah, I mean, originally it wasn't. I think the original plan was to suck it and see, to see if it made a difference. And I've been impressed by the work we've managed to do in relation to convening and delivery. So I think the intention is for it to be permanent.
Okay.
If you remember, it was originally part-time as well.
Yes, first year was part-time, second year now full-time role. And you see that as continuing indefinitely?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I've seen no reason why we would stop doing the work. And as you said, as we remind each other, originally part-time, then full-time, temporary, and now we think it's going to be permanent, we think.
Okay.
Subject to budgets, of course.
Indeed. And the role of the Night Czar is to work alongside the Nighttime Commission.
Yeah, although the Nighttime Commission is independent, but they work closely together. So a good example is the recent report that's prepared by GLA Intelligence. The Nighttime Commission had a big role to play in there, as did the Night Czar, but the Nighttime Commission would see themselves, rightfully so, as independent, and they're experts who give up their time to do that piece of work. Okay.
What would you say is the key achievement or key achievements of the Night Czar in the 2 years that the Night Czar position has existed?
We've got a few which I'll let Justine read out in relation to the achievements of the Night Czar. One of the biggest issues and things that she's been able to achieve is give it a focus. And so whether it's going on surgeries with assembly members, whether it's convening the nighttime champions the boroughs have, whether it's working with the Culture at Risk office to make sure that whether it's a nightclub or a LGBT music venue, they know who to contact, whether it's been an advocate for the nighttime economy. For example, the recent work done by the GLA Intelligence has led to us looking at how we can make sure more of those who don't receive a living wage receive a living wage. So that focus has been really important. But we've got a list of things that Amy's achieved. I'll let Justine deal with that with your permission, Gareth.
Thank you, Sadiq. Yeah, I think as Sadiq said, what it's really done is brought a focus to the nighttime economy, having this position. And, with the nighttime tube coming on stream, I think we've got a real shot at being a fantastic, 24-hour city. And the Night Czar has really provided a kind of leadership position there. She's done a lot of casework, so, every week people are calling for advice. She works very closely with our Culture at Risk office, and, the office itself has seen about 300 cases come through. She's done 14 night surgeries so far. 9 have been in outer London boroughs. The most recent one she did was in Redbridge with Assembly Member Prince. She's led the review of 696 successfully. She has published a Women's Safety Charter. LGBT venues charter, and of course another really key plank of the work is the work with the boroughs. So in every single borough in London there is a nighttime champion, so that is someone in that borough who is championing the nighttime economy and the vision. And those people come together regularly at City Hall, and the Night Tsar chairs that group. And the goal of that group really is that, you know, every borough is working towards their own nighttime vision, which will be a fantastic outcome of the programme of work.
Okay, that last thing about nighttime champions in boroughs is news to me. Who appoints the nighttime champions?
They're self-appointed. It's for the borough to propose who they want. So, in fact, there's a variety of different people. It can be political people, it can be officers. It's where the energy is, really.
Okay, and every borough has one?
Sorry?
Every borough has one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I clearly need to speak to my boroughs.
If it helps, so one of the points that Susan raised was that the challenge between concerns of residents and a nighttime economy. And one of the things the champion does is try and bridge that and stuff. But we can do you a note, if it helped, Chair, after this meeting, to give you an idea of the nighttime champions Amy's met and just a heat map of where they are, if that helps.
That would be very helpful indeed.
And to the chair of the committee as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the offer. The role of the Night Tsar is a new one. It's trailblazing, and that means it's not quite a leap in the dark, if you forgive the pun, but it's something that hasn't been done before. What key objectives and measurable objectives are set for the role of the Night Tsar?
Yeah, well, as you say, brand new role, so we're kind of working this through as we go along. But fundamentally, we are looking at the numbers of sign-ups to the charters, so that demonstrates how many businesses and organisations are signing up to things like the Women's Safety Charter, LGBT Venues Charter. We've committed to annual audits, so of course lots of the work is around at-risk venues, pubs, grassroots music venues, and we've committed to doing annual audits so we can actually track progress now, so that will be a KPI. And of course the visions and the strategies produced by the nighttime champions within the boroughs, and then capturing all the casework as well. I mentioned the 300 cases, so there'll be some KPIs around that, and night surgeries as well.
So you have got KPIs around that, or you're going to create KPIs around that?
Around what, sorry?
Sorry, the microphone's still not working. Did you say you have got KPIs around those activities, or you're going to set KPIs around those activities?
No. We have got. We are measuring annual audits. We are monitoring the sign-up of charters. We are. Our goal is to have a nighttime vision in every single borough.
Yeah.
And of course, the casework is getting kind of captures in terms of the number of cases that the Tsar and her team are supporting.
Okay, so are there targets assigned with these KPIs, or is the KPI just a sort of monitoring of the activity that's going on?
At the moment, it's monitoring. I mean, our goal is to have, we would like to see every borough in London have a nighttime vision, but of course it's not in our gift. This is to do with how boroughs work, how licensing comes forward, how, you know, local plans get put together. So, you know, it's not something that we can just kind of decide to do, and neither can boroughs. It's kind of working with the boroughs on their timelines.
Okay, so who is
so
the line...
So we set a kind of vision and a goal, and we're working towards that.
Yeah, I understand. I get the point. Who is the line manager of the Night Tsar? Is that you, or is that directly into the mayor? It's you?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. That will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I apologise to Assemblymember Curtin? I jumped the agreed programme. So, Assemblymember Curtin.
I think Assemblymember Whittle might ask her.
Oh, yes.
I beg your pardon?
I think Assemblymember Whittle is going to ask a question.
Assemblymember Whittle is going to stand in for you. Okay.
Okay. Perhaps I could ask the Deputy Mayor this particular question. It's sort of a
we can't hear you.
Chair, I think there is a sound system problem because Gareth is not unusually quiet, and so there's a problem. There is. We couldn't hear. I mean, there is a problem. I just can't.
Is mine down?
Yeah.
Am I all right now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. Just a morning. I was very encouraged in the plan, the Love London section. Particularly because of your intention to look after local culture, because I think there is this sense in which London's this huge glittering thing in the middle, but what about all the rest? But in particular, I just wanted, when you say we'll establish culture seeds, distributing 1 million in micro grants to fund grassroots culture, can you just give me a little bit of detail how you actually work out what grassroots culture is? I know it will vary from each borough to each borough. How do you make that How do you define that? How do you make that judgment?
Yeah. Thank you. So the Culture Seeds project is a brand new idea. It's £1 million. And the idea is that small grants, micro grants, can make a lot of activity happen. And, what we know is that, the best way to start your engagement with culture is in a kind of personal way. And, the grants are between £1,000 and £5,000. So, that can make the difference between hiring a community hall, paying someone to lead your choir.
I'm terribly sorry, I just am finding it very difficult to hear you. Maybe I'm going...
Yeah, it's not you.
I'm just going to break the thing here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry. That's better, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so Culture Seeds, £1 million, very micro grants between £1,000 and £5,000. And this is really for Londoners and communities to tell us what they want to do, because that's the best way to start your engagement in culture. So, that tiny amount of money can be the difference of hiring a community hall. It can pay your tutor if you've got a choir or a music group. And it's really for communities to propose their projects to us. So that's what we mean by grassroots. It's really for them to define what they think will bring real value. We've had fantastic projects come forward. I'll give you a few examples. We've funded so far 52 projects in 25 boroughs.
52 in 24 boroughs?
52 projects in 25 boroughs so far. We launched it in May. The team have done nearly 30 roadshows all around the capital. We've funded fantastic things, art walks for young people on housing estates. There's a project which is about developing a comic strip which explores gang crime. We've got music for older people in care homes. So it's quite kind of socially purposed activity, but it's joyous.
I see. So basically it's true to say that they are, as it were, creative current things. When you talk about local culture, it's not, for example, the cultural infrastructure, as it were.
No.
So it's sort of about actually people doing things.
And it's really for people who don't ordinarily get big public grants. People who are outside the system. They're normally not kind of constituted in a big formal institutional way. This is communities wanting to do stuff.
Can I ask just one more point to that? If you are giving grants or whatever, is there a kind of plan or an incentive to get people, as it were, possibly local people, businesses, to match the amount,
Yeah, I think that's definitely in our mind. I mean, it's a brand new idea, but moving forward, I think it'd be interesting to get some match funding. I think at the moment, because it's brand new, we're kind of testing it out. We've got independent evaluators appointed to look at how it goes. But absolutely, that is in our minds to think how we might bring some big partners and grow the thing.
I see. And finally, there's $1 million in total. I think you might have answered when I couldn't hear you. But is there an average amount or whatever that people get? I suppose you can't say how long it's a piece of string.
I can get that for you, yeah. But it's tiny. It's micro grants between £1,000 and £5,000. So 5,000. Between 1 and 5, yeah. But if you want, I'm very happy to kind of crunch the numbers and give you an average.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr Mayor. Good morning, Deputies. You touched on the fact that you want to make sure that arts is accessible to all Londoners in your cultural strategy. What steps are you taking to improve accessibility and participation across London's wider cultural offer?
This is a big concern of ours. In my opening, I referred to, and so did the chair of the Economy Committee, London being the cultural capital of the world. The bad news is there are too many Londoners who don't enjoy the fruits of that culture. We think a third of Londoners don't enjoy the fruits of that culture. And the real issues are the cost, accessibility, and where they are. So a number of things that Justine's alluded to in answer to a previous question, and I've referenced we're doing. The London Borough of Culture, really important. Waltham Forest 2019, Brent 2020. In those boroughs, we know there are too many people who don't access culture. The Cultural Seeds programme that Justine just referred to, 26 boroughs are already receiving these funds. Often children and young people otherwise haven't got access to culture. As Shona said, the creative enterprise zones will be announced tomorrow, and the communities that receive, that be in the zones, we would hope you'll be pleased with those parts of London where participation isn't as high as it should be. We're also doing lots of crowdfunding. The great thing about crowdfunding is it gets the local community engaged in the project and it gets them buy-in in relation to match funding, something that Peter referred to as match funding in relation to businesses, but actually crowdfunding gets citizens, turns Londoners into citizens, and they get buy-in into the work we're doing. A couple of other things which will excite you is, as part of the deal we're making with the new Museum of London is they've got to double the amount of Londoners who go and visit that museum. As it is, every school benefits from the Museum of London. I think they've got an increase to 2 million, the amount of Londoners who go and visit that, which is very exciting. The final couple of things around participation. The Young Londoners Fund, which I know you support, the £45 million over 3 years. Part of this goes towards the sports team in relation to participation. Really important they get engaged in sports facilities. The final thing, which I know you're passionate about as well, is community events. So whether it's Africa in the Square, whether it's Hanukkah in the Square, whether it's Diwali in the Square, Eid in the Square, Pride, that's leading to Londoners who otherwise don't get involved in cultural things getting involved as well. So it's really important to get more Londoners enjoying the fruits of our culture.
And that's great. Deputy Mayor, like you, I sat in the Arts Council London region for 7 years, and I was quite proud to push a promotion of BME groups and some of those smaller organisations. And I think there is still a notion that particular groups in London don't enjoy the arts, but we know that they do. How are you going to ensure that there's a focus on some of those particular groups, including BME groups and young Londoners, to actually enjoy what's on offer in London?
Thank you. Yeah, really important question. It's something that we are is top priority for us. When we look at the statistics, we can see exactly that we are a fantastic world-class capital, but not all Londoners get the benefits of that, are engaged in that, and that is both from the point of view of participation, but also jobs. And we can see that across our industry. So we've been doing a number of things. The Mayor, a few weeks ago, launched a theatre diversity action plan with the union BEC2, and nearly 100 theatres have signed up to that across the UK, lots in London, I think almost half in London. And that is the biggest push around diversity, workforce diversity that we've seen in the theatre industry. To coincide with the London Film Festival, the Mayor and I launched the Equal Access Network, which is a programme with Film London, and it has a lot of industry buy-in, people like Sony and HBO backing that scheme, and that is all about diversifying the workforce, and we were expecting to see 180 BAME leaders come through that programme. As part of our Behind Every Great City campaign, we've been doing lots of work around diversity. Cyan Anderson, who's one extra DJ and musician, led a leadership programme for 10 BAME young women musicians, and they actually produced an EP with their work responding to the themes around the centenary, and they will continue to work together. Lots of great outcomes have come out of that project. And also as part of our Behind Every Great City centenary campaign, we also worked with the Tate and 10 young women and non-binary BAME artists to produce artworks honouring their heroes on the streets of the capital and the walls. So that's just the kind of beginning, and next year we'll be doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And that's great, really great initiatives to hear, but how are you specifically going to be measuring some of that progress? Because again, I look at the fact that 2 weeks ago I took my kids to a fantastic theatre in Southwark, the Blue Elephant Theatre. We were the LBME family, slap bang in the middle of Campbell. How are you going to really ensure that we measure some of that success in getting more of those groups involved in arts and culture?
Yeah, well, within the Diversity Action Plan, for example, there are measures set within that, and BEC2 are kind of the owners of that, so they're working with the theatres in an ongoing way. All of the programmes I've spoken about, we'll be monitoring the kind of success and the outcomes of those. We've had very good meetings with the Arts Council, the Mayor and myself, to look at how targets can be set within the Arts Council's 10-year plan, which is in development at the moment. And I think the smart thing for us to do is look at where the levers are. Look at where our strategic influence can really push on this issue. And working, for example, with the Arts Council, if it's in their 10-year plan, then it's in the grant agreements that they fund across the organisations. So I think it's kind of thinking, where can we best use our influence to get, to really push the dial on diversity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, I want to start by saying on behalf of the Green Group, I really welcome the strategy's ambition to improve access and particularly participation in culture and the arts for all Londoners. And also the ways that you've interlinked this strategy with all your other strategies so it's not sitting in a silo. And I particularly welcome your adoption of the Cultural Inclusion Manifesto to improve access to the arts for people with disabilities. And on a personal level, in terms of workspace, as a former practicing artist, I'm really excited to see the work of the Creative Land Trust and look forward to seeing how this develops over time and whether it can provide affordable workspace for creative Londoners in perpetuity. But I want to ask you now a bit about the Good Work Standard.
Yes.
There's no detail of the final Good Work Standard available, but both your economic development strategy and culture strategy refer repeatedly to it. And when I questioned you recently, you said you were soft launching the Good Work Standard during 2018 to get businesses signed up with a bigger launch next year. So I want to know, how's the soft launch going and how many creative and cultural institutions and companies have signed up to the Good Work Standard so far?
Thank you for your comments and your question. So the beta testing was supposed to begin in December. That may not begin now till January. That's what I mean by soft launch. That's when you sort of soft launch it, iron out the problems, get people involved. So the latest, I asked this question yesterday, the beta testing hasn't begun. I think it'll begin in January. Can I, Chair, after this session, just contact your office to let you know when we think it's going to begin in January. I'm very happy for you to be involved in relation to that.
That would be great, and if you can provide an update on...
We'll speak offline, but I think it's pushed back to January, but I'll let you know definitively after this meeting, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. So also, in my response to your draft strategy, I asked you to include more information about how the Good Work Standard will address poor pay and, I quote, the pockets of bad practice amongst creative employers across the capital, end quote, that you had rightly identified as an issue. Yeah. Now, you've removed the phrase about pockets of bad practice from the final strategy, but your new nighttime economy data that we discussed the other day showed that over half the people working in culture and leisure industries at night are paid less than the London living wage. So there are still some pretty big pockets of bad practice out there. So how are you going to address these areas of bad employment practice amongst companies who are not signed up to the Good Work Standard in the creative and cultural sector?
Well, one of the things that we're trying to do, and this is in answer to a question that Gareth Bacon asked earlier on about the role of the Nights Eye, is her ability to bring people together and persuade them the benefits of signing up to a charter or becoming a Good Work Standard employee is really important. And all the evidence is somebody who treats their employees well has increased productivity, better issues in relation to recruitment, retention and progression, less days off sick, etc. One of the problems in relation to the nighttime economy is not simply that 500,000 Londoners earn below the living wage, but some of them are self-employed. And so there are challenges in relation to what the Good Work Standard can do. You'll be aware we can't force an employer to be a Good Work Standard employer, but we can use carrots by naming and praising those that are, and by default, those that aren't Good Work Standard employees, and the consumer knows this. Already, I've written to, whether it's cinemas or others, to encourage them to be good employees. We all know about the well-publicised cases of cinemas not paying their staff the living wage, and I've written to them. I'll be praising those who are good employees, and I think that way we can try and raise the standards in London. You know, it's not good enough that many of us pay huge amounts of money to go to a theatre or to a piece of culture, and the staff who work in those places are getting paid bad salaries and stuff. That's why it's important we as consumers do our bit as well to put pressure on the cultural providers.
Thank you. And beyond that, there's one other area, which is GLA procurement.
Yes.
In my response to your strategy in June, I urged you to make payment to the London living wage a stated condition for any culture programmes and initiatives that the GLA are directly involved in setting up and commissioning. Now, your response wasn't totally clear, so can I just clarify, will the GLA only commission creative companies or projects that pay their employees, hired or contracted, the London living wage?
Well, I'll let Justin answer that in a second, but just to clarify, as an answer to the question that Peter asked about cultural seeds, many of the groups we fund are volunteers. So we couldn't, strictly speaking, have as a condition of receiving GLA money, everyone must receive the living wage. So some of those schemes, you get £1,000, £2,000, they're not paid. They just
okay, yes, I get that that's a problem. But if you're commissioning, a performance, something happening in Trafalgar Square, or a sort of big piece of, a big cultural event, which London does very well, do you make the London Living Wage a condition of those kind of events?
I'm going to ask you to defer to Shona because she does.
Absolutely. So there are. I will try and speak up here. There are two pieces of work that the GLA is doing to look at its own practices at the moment. The one is a new diversity and inclusion action standard that we are all reflecting on, and this is about how we offer an inclusive and responsible environment here at the GLA, and the other is a focus on procurement. So there is a piece of work progressing around the GLA's procurement, the powers and the approach to that. It's not a piece that I'm leading, but I'm sure we could bring an update on that.
That would be very welcome to have a written update. Can I finally just follow up on the Assembly's climate emergency motion from last week? And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for declaring a climate emergency. I just want to know if you've yet thought about the implications of this for the culture strategy. For instance, fossil fuel companies like BP sponsor some big cultural players in London. So what are your thoughts on the GLA working with cultural partners who accept sponsorship from fossil fuel companies?
Well, we've done lots of work in relation to the links between culture and the green industry. I mean, I think Justine with Vivian, talk about some of the schemes we've been doing, Justine.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot, actually. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, for example, a few fashion weeks ago, we launched alongside Vivian Westwood a big programme called Switch to Green Energy, which was really successful. A lot of the big department stores and major brands have signed up to that now, and that was a joint initiative between us, the British Fashion Council and Vivian Westwood. And we're doing lots, actually we're doing a lot internationally, actually taking a lead from the C40, which is that we've got lots to share as cities around the world. And Greening the Creative Industries is the major work programme within the World Cities Culture Forum. And we're looking at what we can learn from each other, how particularly the creative organisations can play a leadership role, but also get our own house in order, and what we can do in terms of our buildings and our infrastructure, how we can jointly procure. All of that kind of shared learning is happening as a major programme at an international level, and London is very much kind of at the heart of that.
Thank you, I'm out of time.
You are indeed. Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you. Your culture strategy discusses the need to protect London's grassroots music venues, recognising their role as important cultural assets. But what I feel both the strategies before us today have failed to identify local sports infrastructure as important cultural assets and how they too are at risk. In 2 weeks' time, Dulwich Hamlet Football Club will finally return to Champion Hill after being locked out of their ground for the last 8 months. But we've also seen Edgware Town, Hendon, Enfield Town football clubs all lose their historic homes in recent years as property developers circle. So how will you use these strategies to strengthen protections for grassroots football club grounds in London?
Well, one of the comments made by the chair of the Economy Committee was a concern they had about the draft strategy not being linked with the other strategies we had. And it was a point we've taken on board, and so the new sports strategy talks about the links with other strategies we have. So, for example, the draft London plan protects not just the green belt, but the green spaces we have, and is a message to developers in relation to the expectation upon them. I was in contact with the American owners of Dulwich Hamlet's home ground, and in fact went to see them play Tooting and Mitcham. As well, and it's really good they're getting back. But for every Dulwich and Hamlet success story, there are many, as you've said, stories that aren't successful. What we've done in our plan is, in sports, is make sure we support where we can grassroots clubs by the funding that we do with Sports United. Very important to support them where we can, but also in planning it's very important. Working with developers when it comes to any green space that's not protected, being built and has got to be replaced. Like for like, really, really important. We want to protect our playing fields. One of the criticisms that the Shadow Sports Minister, Rosetta Allen Khan, raised recently was the Olympic legacy being squandered by sports fields being sold off. That's now protected in the draft London plan. So we've got to use planning in a sensible way, but make sure developers understand the quid pro quo for development is to make sure they protect the sports facilities that we have.
So the London plan is what you're using there. That's good to hear. Your sports strategy presents a case study of the Everton in the Community programme, but there are a number of fantastic initiatives Closer to home, I recently went to the West Ham's Players Project, and Arsenal in the community has been running since 1985. They're great examples. Are you working with these football clubs to ensure the work of your Sport Unites programme doesn't overlap with these other community programmes?
Can I thank you for naming and praising our fantastic Premier League clubs for the foundation work they do. I mean, Mark Noble, the captain of West Ham, himself goes out and does things. It's really impressive to see these well-paid footballers understanding the responsibility they have. We've got 6 fantastic Premier League clubs in London. We do work with them to avoid overlap. But Simon, if you spend a moment to talk about some of the work we do to encourage some of the sports clubs to do work with schools, would be helpful, I think.
Sure. I mean, we do work with the clubs and their foundations particularly, and all of the clubs have a foundation arm, and they do fantastic work in the community, and that's the main engagement route for us, but as well as the clubs. So we're working with the Crystal Palace Foundation, for example, the Arsenal Foundation. We have been in contact with us about a scheme that will involve and include work in schools, and we're looking very much at the Daily Mile initiative, which the Mayor helped launch recently with some O'Farr in Tower Hamlets. So there's a whole range of things we're doing with the clubs, with the foundations too.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask about internships within the culture and creative industries, because I think that the figures from the recent Sutton Trust research found that 4 in 10 graduates in their 20s have done an internship, including almost half of young graduates under 24. And clearly, one of the ways people get ahead in these industries, and I was pleased to hear some of the initiatives about sort of diversifying the workforce, is through internships, which I think would be viewed as almost an essential step for people wanting a career in culture and creative industries. Do you agree with Alan Milburn that unpaid internships, I think about a third of internships are unpaid, are damaging for social mobility?
Yeah, I think long-term unpaid internships are really bad news. I mean, look, you can understand if you've got wealthy mum, dad, means because of your family, you can afford to do an unpaid internship, and you have a huge advantage over those who can't. One of the things we're doing in the Good Work Standard is tackling unpaid internships in the Good Work Standard. So if you want to be a Good Work Standard employer, you shouldn't have unpaid internships. And just think about all those talented Londoners who, because they've not had the advantage of unpaid internships, their CVs are less impressive than those who have. There's a question of unfairness to those, and you know there are some really talented future Idris Elbas in London who, because of the blockage of unpaid internships, can't have that opportunity, and so we are keen to tackle that issue. And what Alan Milburn was identifying, not simply in the cultural world, but in also in politics. It's a big thing in politics. You go to Parliament and see the numbers of unpaid interns, ostensibly from a middle-class background or upper middle-class background, who have a huge leg up. And when it comes to applying for paid jobs, they've got a cracking CV, whereas others who can't afford unpaid internships haven't.
No, absolutely. And I think the other issue you've identified is the sort of the class divide in the internships as well, because it's about who you know or who your parents know. And what are you able to do through your strategies, including this one, to make sure that young people who haven't got those parental networks can actually get in the door in the first place?
Well, I think if Justine sort of glossed over because of brevity of time, the work we're doing with young BME women, good example of women who otherwise wouldn't have access to, getting an EP out or access to mentoring. We've managed to do that. So there are some examples of work we're specifically doing to give those young people access to the opportunities they will need to be successful.
I think the other things I'd add are, one of the barriers, I think, is actually poor careers advice. So what we find is that a lot of young people, they actually don't know what jobs are available. I mean, 40% of film jobs are behind the camera. If you look at fashion, people tend to think it's the catwalk, but actually it's marketing, it's IT, it's finance. There's a breadth of jobs in all of these industries, and it's a really growing industry. The creative industry is growing 4 times faster than the base economy. So these are the kind of jobs of the future. And so we've got a job to do as well of kind of raising awareness of what is available. And one of the things that we're doing is working with the careers advisors through the Enterprise Advisors programme, which is part of the business strategy. And so we've got lots of creative industry people who are going to go into schools and advise the careers advisors about what those jobs are. I think that's one thing that we can do. So it's sort of kind of...
And will that work back to work experience from school as well? Because obviously, even though sort of we campaign about... I mean, that's also, in a lot of cases, dependent on who you know and how you get in.
Definitely.
So will that careers advice go back to sort of opportunities for work
because those
experience
enterprise
too?
advisors will then be able to open up their own networks because they commit something like kind of 10 or 12 sessions throughout the course of a year. I think the other thing for London as well is apprenticeships, which is not the same, but it's related. We've been lobbying, Sadiq's been lobbying government to open up apprenticeships because we see a really low take-up of apprenticeships in the creative industries in London. It's not quite working for the creative industries, the apprenticeship programmes, and that's because of the structure. It's very kind of SME, very kind of sole traders, small organisations, and they find it really hard to work with apprenticeship schemes. So that's something that we're lobbying government about and trying to open that up because, of course, that is a fantastic route into the industry.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I warmly welcome and endorse your groundbreaking vision to promote culture and creative industries, and equally the work that your team does. I want to pick up a broader issue in terms of how will your cultural strategy protect London's cultural assets?
So just to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, in the last few years we've lost 85 youth centres, 35% of live music venues, 25% of our pubs, 61% of our LGBT plus venues, 30% of our artist workspaces. So there's a big issue there in relation to the graph going downwards. The good news is, as a result of the policies in our first 2 years, that's plateaued, and we're now seeing some stabilisation but some upward projections in relation to a number of the things I've just mentioned. And the policies that are helping us do this is the Culture at Risk Office. Over the last year, this has helped over 300 venues across London, which otherwise may have closed down because of our advice, signposting, putting people together. There are successful stories from nightclubs to pubs that have stayed open, really important. Shona referred to the creative enterprise zones we're launching tomorrow. We're hoping that will lead to, particularly in town centres, artist workspaces being kept. We now have a board that advises us in relation to workspaces going forward. But it's really important to also think about planning. Caroline asked a question about sports and planning, but actually there's also a link between culture and planning. So when it comes to a developer who wants to build something in a basement that was currently a nightclub, we can use the Culture at Risk Office who speak with the planning team to make sure the developer knows the expectation is if they want permission, there's got to be a music venue store in the basement going forward.
No, I absolutely agree. The importance of this being part of London Plan policies as well. I agree that artist workspaces in capital are now showing signs of stabilizing. But at the same time, when you look at the numbers, demand for artist workspaces is incredibly high, with 95% of spaces occupied and nearly 14,000 places on waiting list with 227 site providers. Given that the cost and availability of workspaces is a big issue for those in creative industries in the capital, how are you ensuring that there is adequate, affordable space that creative industries need?
One of the things we want to do is give the councils the tools going forward. So why the cultural infrastructure plan is so important going forward is that will provide the evidence and tools councils need in relation to persuading developers to do the right thing in relation to future artist workspaces. We've had a big problem with permitted development in relation to losing the spaces we have, and so with the cultural infrastructure plan, that'll give the councils the tools they need to stop artist workspaces being turned into luxury flats or residential developments and being lost forever. The creative enterprise zones will help there as well going forward. But really we need to realise that if we don't have the artist workspace in London, one of two things will happen. Either people who would otherwise have been artists won't, or they'll leave London and go somewhere else. And as was referred to by both myself in the opening, but also by questions from colleagues here, the financial contribution to our economy is massive through culture. So if we're losing artists from London, that means we're losing the benefits they could bring to our city economically, as well as the additional benefits as well. That's why we've got a number of plans, including helping councils keep what we've got, but have more workspace going forward.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to draw your attention to a specific recommendation that Regeneration Committee report on, which was called Creative Tensions, made last year. And that was to protect not just iconic venues in London, but also smaller grassroots venues for their contribution that they make to culture and regeneration overall.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, we can't ignore the smaller venues. They're really important to communities as well as putting aside the economic benefit as well. And that's why the planning policies we have and the evidence we're going to give councils with the cultural infrastructure plan will assist those councils. We're already seeing, by the way, pubs that in previous years were turned into supermarkets and luxury flats now not being done so because of the planning protection we have in place. That's really important going forward for other artistic workspaces as well.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Turning back to sport, Mr Mayor, I'm really pleased that in your strategy you very much recognise the power of sport, particularly around areas of cohesion, integration and well-being. I best declare an interest as a trustee of Crystal Palace Foundation, who have been in receipt of funding in the past, and there's another trustee of another foundation here today. And I'd also like to recognise the work, very good work, of the previous incumbent, Matthew Ryder, the work that he did, and I hope that continues very much under your new Deputy Chair. And I'd also like, over the period of time I've been in the Assembly, the excellent work of the Sports Development team. So I'd like to put that on record. I'd like to talk about the funding, however, you're committing to sport within your strategy. Could you just confirm the total amount committed to sport in your new strategy, Mr Mayor?
Well, there's the direct funding, then there's the partnership funding and the leverage funding. So the direct grant funding in relation to Sports United is £8.8 million. On top of that, of course, you'll be aware of the sort of partnership funding we have and the leverage funding. You know, for example, that Steve Parish and Palace do lots of funding themselves. So we partnership with Palace, for example, but there'll be other clubs we partnership with as well. So it's difficult to give a specific figure, but the direct funding for Sports United, Simon, is £8.8 million.
8.8 million. You'll be aware, and I'll just inform you, under the previous mayor, the funding that he committed, and also to his credit and his administration, recognised the same issue, particularly around the benefit of sport to young Londoners at the moment, particularly the challenges that many young Londoners are meeting. The previous mayor committed around about 25.5 million to grassroots funding. Would you like to comment on the disparity between your commitment and funding and the previous administration?
There's a few things in relation to that. I'll let Debbie and Simon come in as well. Don't forget there are additional fundings we're doing for young people. It's not simply sports, whether it's Young Londoners Fund, whether it's the work we're doing as well. Secondly, we're doing a huge amount of partnership and leverage work. But thirdly, and rightly so, with the Olympics in 2012, that was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. There'll be differences of opinion about legacies and stuff, and about whether we've managed to achieve everything we wanted to do. But I think it was right and proper around the Olympics that we spent a huge amount of money before, during, and after in relation to grassroots sport. But we're committed to sports. But additionally, what we're doing is making sure there are additional benefits to the sport. So for example, the integration work we're doing, which Debbie can talk about, is not simply just funding in the sense of the normal grant funding situation, but it's additional help we're giving as well.
Yep. So thank you very much for the question. The work that we're doing promoting social integration through sport is actually quite innovative. I know you mentioned your engagement with Matthew prior to my starting. Matthew spent a great deal of time through our broader social integration activities trying to find out what other cities were doing in relation to social integration, and many cities actually look to London as setting the standard for promoting social integration in a particular way. And so the work that we're doing in relation to promoting social integration through sport is quite innovative. Interestingly, what it does is it allows us to work both with sporting and non-sporting organisations to ensure that we are bringing people from very different backgrounds together to enjoy and participate in sport, but also we have a focus on physical activity. So we've defined sport not just as the competitive activities that we might traditionally think of when we think of sport, but also engaging in physical activities like dance, like yoga, etc. And trying to use grassroots community organisations to bring people together who don't traditionally participate. So we're trying to increase inactivity rates among particular groups of people, but many of the groups that we're funding do sport activities whilst also doing other activities which are directed around cohesion and social integration. There's one really interesting project that we're funding called Muslim Fence, which brings Muslim and non-Muslim women together to learn fencing skills, and also enables them to engage in creative workshops, so they get to discuss some of the main aims of what they're doing. So I think it's the work that we're doing around social integration and also in activity and a range of other broad issues through sport are quite innovative, and we're hoping that they can help us to achieve some of the aims around bringing people together and breaking down some of those barriers that exist.
Yeah, thank you. I took Matthew down to Streatham Croydon Rugby Club in Thornton Heath, which is an area with some issues with young people, and they were a good example. I'd be delighted again to take you down to show that as well. So my last point, Mr Mayor, if your strategy takes you to 2021, the funding thereafter, if you are fortunate enough to be re-elected, there will be 3 years remaining in your term. Will you commit now in that new cycle to commit further funding to sports development, perhaps even indeed matching the previous mayor?
Well, the bad news, Chair, is I'm not writing my manifesto now in front of the Cultural and Sports Strategy plenary session. But just to say, you know as well as we both experienced the power of sport to change our lives, and I'm a big advocate of this. So what I can commit to do is continue to make sure that I give this area my full attention. It's really important. But there is some good news though, Steve. We have managed to leverage in money from the private sector, whether it's Nike, whether it's Laureus, whether it's Comic Relief, and some others. Put aside the Premier League clubs, the NFL clubs, the basketball teams, baseball next year, which I think gives me confidence that we can continue to build on what the previous mayor did, but also hopefully what you've seen that we're doing as well.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to turn to the nighttime economy. Could you tell us how your culture strategy will diversify the nighttime offer so all Londoners can enjoy what London nighttime economy has to offer?
I mean, this is really important that everyone gets to enjoy the benefits of the nighttime economy. It's a question Florence also asked. I mean, I too have been to the theatre too many times and seen people not like me or like Florence and other things I've been to. And that should cause us concern. And so there are a number of things we're doing in relation to making the offer for the nighttime economy more attractive, making it safer for women. The charter that Justine referred to is really important. Making it safer for the LGBT plus community, the charter there is really important. Not just keeping the venues open, but knowing if you're a member of the LGBT plus community, you know, as somebody who's an LGBT plus Londoner, that the bad news is you're more likely to be the victim of certain types of crime and behaviour. So know that somewhere is a safe place makes it more welcoming you to do so. You'll also know some Londoners don't drink. I speak for myself, but you want to make sure that some of the venues are welcoming to people who don't drink. So we are doing a huge amount of work there, from working with the nighttime borough champions to working with pubs to diversify the offer pubs are making, the LGBT plus charter, the Women's Night Safety Charter, but also making sure that when it comes to things like Euro 2020, we think about what other cultural offers there are. One of the pieces of work Justine did was around the Cultural Olympiad in 2012. Not everyone is a sports fan, but we had to make the Olympics, Justine had to make the Olympics open to others. Similarly, Euro 2020, not everyone's a football fan. But if we're savvy, we can make it a real cultural experience and diversify the offer to Londoners.
No, there were some great events at the Cultural Olympiad, I remember. I just want to go back to the Women's Night Safety Charter. How many venues have already signed up to that?
Good question. So the Women's Night Safety Charter, 36 organisations have signed up, and they include venues like the O2 and others, but also a number of membership organisations have signed up, like UK Hospitality and the Music Venue Trust. And as Justine said, one of the things Amy will be doing is to try and encourage more organisations and membership organisations to sign up to the charter. Can I just give you an example why it's important?
Sure.
I've spoken to Londoners who are women who've told me of feeling harassed in a club, going to the loo, seeing a sign up in the loo telling them what to do, which is to report it to the bar using specific wording, and the bar staff have then made sure that the harasser's been kicked out of the club. One simple example of the difference the Charter's making to the experience of a Londoner who otherwise would feel uncomfortable, may not go out again at night time, to feel comfortable.
I've seen those posters up as well. And what are you doing to make the nighttime economy safe and attractive for other communities? And you mentioned, for example, people who don't drink alcohol.
I'll let Justin answer that one, but it's really important that, by the way, January is the month when many Londoners who otherwise would drink go dry. We want to make sure they still come and spend on the night time.
Including me, yes.
Yeah, the offer is very important. Justine.
I mean, I think, Sadiq's mentioned a number of the initiatives, but of course, one of the big roles of the night side is convening. So around these various charters, there's also, groups that have convened around Form 696, and that group is now evolving into a new kind of group to take that work forward. There's also the nighttime champions, and then that is bringing together, kind of licensing, MOPAC, the police. What we're looking at here is a kind of joined-up approach, really. That is the kind of convening power of the work we're doing. And it's all about creating that balance, a great place. We want London to be a great place to kind of live, to go out at night, to be safe, and that has to be done in partnership. So the whole kind of raison d'etre of this piece of work is partnership.
Okay, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor and also Deputy Mayors, it's about London and Partners, and I just wondered if you could say a bit more about the role of London and Partners in delivering the cultural and sporting strategy.
Okay, can I just, I don't want to blind everyone with numbers, but a couple are really important. We all know that London is the tourist capital of the world. But actually, when you speak to the tourists that come to London, 4 out of 5 come to London because of the culture in our city. So it's crucial. So when people criticise us for spending too much on culture or for increasing expenditure in culture, they don't really understand the importance of culture to our economy, let alone the intrinsic benefit of culture. Now, why London and Partners is really important is because they advertise the great thing about London for our friends overseas. So whether it's trade missions that we do, Rajesh, myself or others, or whether it's the conversation we have, we need to push the cultural offer. So I'm really proud, for example, that London Partners promotes some of the great things happening in London. From next summer, we'll have for the first time ever Major League Baseball in London, 2 biggest teams, Yankees versus the Red Sox. Both of the mayors are my friends. I'm not sure I'm going to support yet. I'll have to work that out, depending on which one of them comes to London. But that's an opportunity to do a trade mission from Chicago and also New York to our city. MLB is massive. The fact that the commissioner of Major League, of National Football League, NFL, arguably the most powerful sports person in the world, comes to London, as do the club owners, is really important. London Partners push that. The mayor of Philadelphia was here during the Eagles game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, as was the mayor of Jacksonville as well. Basketball, very important. So London Partners play a huge role there. Look, the first city Hamilton went to outside New York was London. The world premiere of Harry Potter was in London. And so culture is really important. And London Partners pushes our opportunities. They also speak to people like Heathrow Airport, City Airport, but also places overseas to promote London where we can. And so they're really important. And so, again, people who criticise the budget of London Partners increasing don't really understand how crucial they're going to be going forward, particularly if Brexit happens.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear about the baseball, because obviously baseball has massively infected our language, hitting it out of the park and stepping up to the plate, and all of these baseball terms that...
Let alone the baseball cap you wear, Leonie.
I don't very often. It doesn't really go with my hair, as it so happens. But I think it's really important that we branch it out beyond the obvious central venues. Yeah, and I know that that's something that they've been looking at a bit with their area guides. And obviously I was very pleased to see the Lonely Planet guide that said that Tooting is one of the top 10 coolest places in cities, and I saw on page 137 of the strategy it mentions Crystal Palace and Richmond and Greenwich as well as Tooting. But I'm conscious that, beyond the centre of London, you've got Dulwich Picture Gallery, in Dulwich you've got the Horniman Museum, in Forest Hill, the Polka Dot Theatre in Wimbledon. There's a lot of culture beyond the centre. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what London and Partners are going to do to build on that work of the Borough of Culture, of moving the offer to visitors, tourists beyond the centre and to Londoners as well?
It's such an important question, and it's a really important thing we are now doing in relation to not being obsessed by Zone 1, as important as Zone 1 is. The London Borough of Culture is going to be a real game changer in relation to people outside of our country realising that London isn't just Zone 1. And so when Waltham Forest actually goes live, the plans are so exciting from January. We will make sure we promote Waltham Forest, not just other parts of London, other parts of the country, but London and partners do it as well. And the great thing is we know there is an appetite for tourists to go to outer London, and then Brent as well. But also you mentioned some of the other attractions we have, from Stratford to Dulwich, to Cornymans, to one of the coolest neighbourhoods in the world, Tooting as well. We know which audiences to target, which sort of audiences like outer boroughs, and we know to target early is very important in relation to the work they do. We also want to publish dedicated outer London area guides to encourage people to go to outer London as well. And so this piece of work is being done, Royal Greenwich, Epping Forest. We can name some of the really cool places in outer London, Richmond Park. And so we want to get tourists out there as well. By the way, we also want to get Londoners enjoying other parts of our city as well. And just there's one other work we're doing as well in relation to outer London as well, isn't there? So the East Bank is a good example.
Yeah. Of course, East Bank is the biggest new cultural district that we will have seen since 1851. So that is a fantastic opportunity to really bring culture into the heart of the Olympic legacy. And also from an access point of view, if you look at those surrounding boroughs, we're working really closely with them. A lot of young people, very young boroughs, but also lots of the population that don't engage in culture. So, what we know is taking culture to people, this phrase, culture on your doorstep, will really be delivered through the ambitions around East Bank.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor and Deputy Mayors. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can turn to the Museum of London, there's quite a bit of extra money going into there. So can you tell me what targets, Mayor, and key performance indicators are attached to that money that's gone through?
Yeah, so the London Museum, just to remind colleagues, is we're funded by a number of different partners. City of London, we are one of the funders. I think we've got a capped contribution of £70 million, £4 million a year going forward, and we've agreed with them some targets going forward. Do you want to deal with them, Justine?
Yeah, so already the Museum of London has the most school visits of any museum in the UK, so they're already doing fantastically well, but we've worked with them on a really ambitious target to double visitor numbers, and the goal is to have every school child in London visiting the museum. In terms of the projected jobs, we're looking at generating 2,000 extra jobs, 56 million of additional GVA for the new museum, so they're the kind of broad targets that are within the plan.
We're roughly contributing a fifth of the costs in relation to the new museum. It's going to be £332 million, and we are roughly speaking a fifth of the costs of it being built.
That's when that's already built. The build time is 2022, isn't it?
I don't think they've formally committed to that, but I mean we can put that. I think Sharon has offered to come and
I think that's what you'll find is on the website. Given that it's such a large project, do I dare ask you if it is on time and on budget?
It's not our project, but we can follow that up and get the relevant person to come and speak to you. Yeah. I mean, the museum is still open now. There's still a museum there. It's not closed down. The issue is the new museum.
I know the old one. I've been to the site. That's the new one. Yes. So
yeah,
the new one.
I mean, it's fair to say also we've got observers on the board. Only yesterday I had a conference call with Catherine McGuinness, who is obviously chair of the policy committee at the city. So we work very, very closely, and we're working together with any big capital project. There's bumps in the road, there's changes in, planning, construction, but we are really confident that, it is progressing, it's exciting, it's all going to be delivered within the budget.
Within budget and on time. You'll forgive us because I think we've heard that about other things, but so we'll keep an eye on that. If one of your targets is to double visitor numbers, by when? Which period of time?
I'll have to check that for you within the kind of museum's planning. And do you know off the top of your head? No.
Yeah. So we're not looking at within a very short period of time.
I'll come back to you.
You don't know.
Yeah. I don't want to kind of imagine it, but
I think the question is how soon, when the new museum opens, will the visit numbers double? And we'll come back to you on that figure. But the idea is for the new museum to have double the visitors as the current museum. And your question is, once it's open, how soon will you get the double the numbers? And we'll
well, the trouble is we're looking to... the first question was a lot more money is going into the museum. What has been attached to that in KPIs, etc.
Yeah.
The second thing is on their website it says 2022, so you are really kicking it into the long grass again with doubling numbers, etc., etc. More money's going into everything, and I'm just asking whether we are on time, on budget, and everybody's happy. But you've given me the answer. You say all is going well.
We're all happy, and it's not at all kicking it into the long grass. We're just saying we'll come back to you on the date by which the museum have committed to double the money.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Assembly Member Dismal.
How will your culture strategy reinforce and support the draft London plan in protecting London's at-risk heritage, especially when a new development is proposed, bearing in mind the number of specialist heritage officer posts lost or merged in London Borough's planning departments due to Conservative government cuts?
Yeah, so for the schemes that we see, we've made sure the Culture at Risk Office sees every scheme that goes to the planning team that has a cultural angle to it. And that's already led to, I gave one example in Westminster Council, where a nightclub was going to be lost, is now going to be kept because of the work taking place between the Culture at Risk Office and the planning department. I think there have been 300 schemes that have come to them. But it's really important that we protect the assets that we have. So the draft London plan is quite clear. We're also working with councils to make sure their local plans are quite clear in relation to this. And the cultural infrastructure plan will provide the evidence that councils need going forward in relation to protecting the cultural assets that currently exist. You're right. In addition to talking about new assets, we've got to protect what we have. And that's where the planning ambit of the GLA is so important. But that only applies to schemes that come to us. And that's why the cultural infrastructure plan gives the tools to councils to have the evidence they need to protect cultural assets that wouldn't come to us.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, London's got over 18,000 heritage buildings, and the capital's history goes back, well, before the Romans, over 2,000 years. So that's one of the key attractions to visitors, as we've spoken about already. With local authorities under increasing financial pressure, what help can you give to ensure they maintain their heritage assets, like local museums? What can you do to publicise the smaller or more specialised museums and galleries, for example, borough museums and those attached to universities?
Yeah, before I ask Justine to come in on that, it's just worth reminding ourselves that the biggest funder of culture in the country are councils. And they've lost more than half their money over the last 7-8 years. So you can understand why, you know, our cultural spaces are feeling, you know, really struggling with the financial cuts they've been faced with. But I'll let Justine give you some examples of the work we're doing.
Yes, thank you. I know one of the questions was why don't we have a separate heritage strategy? And that's because heritage is absolutely in the heart of the culture strategy as a statutory document. And Heritage, Historic England are actually a formal consultee on the document. We work very closely with them. As Sadiq has said, the London Plan is a very pro-heritage strategy. The new cultural infrastructure plan now includes lots of heritage assets, so we will be kind of mapping heritage, statues and all the major landmarks, so we'll keep a kind of watch and brief on the status of the heritage in our city. The Museum of London plays an important role too. They have a kind of leadership role across smaller museums, so they give out and administer small grants for the smaller museums and heritage institutions to support their work. We work very closely with the Heritage Lottery Fund. We co-fund a lot of work together. We work collaboratively. And of course, the annual audits that we do, they also give us a kind of really clear idea of what's happening so that we can spot any particular issues. And as Sadiq has said, the Culture at Risk Office deals with a lot of heritage-related cases.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you. Yeah, social integration is a good principle for the sports strategy. But of course, Londoners suffer from many forms of inequality. How will the sports strategy help Londoners overcome the obstacles they face in taking up sport?
Well, I'm going to bring Debbie in a second in relation to the link between sports and social integration. But you'll be aware that one of the things we talk about in the strategy is social isolation, mental health, and social integration, as well as cost as well. And so Debbie will just talk about some of the links between sports and how it can lead to better integration, which is so crucial.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. What's quite important about the strategy as we've devised it is that we have used sport to tackle broader social issues, which include inequality as well as tackling social integration. So we've got 5 key themes that we're trying to address. One is trying to address mental health, one is inactivity, one is social mixing, one is about trying to ensure we bring more people together. And what we're trying to do with the strategy is to develop projects using existing workforces, but also many of the volunteers who do a great deal to prop up our community sports, to address those broader issues by focusing down on the groups who face the biggest barriers across those issues. So if we look at inactivity, for example, the sorts of Londoners who are less likely to be active tend to come from certain parts of the city. They also tend to be older Londoners, they tend to be disabled Londoners, and also women and girls. And so what we've done with the strategy is we have tried to identify and will be identifying projects which look specifically at those groups to make sure that we are trying to address inactivity broadly whilst targeting those groups. If we look at mental health, we know that young people suffer from poor mental health, and one of the things that we're trying to do through our Active Londoners theme in the strategy is making sure that we promote physical and mental health by getting people to engage in sport and physical activity. So I think what's quite important about the strategy as it stands is that we're trying to do something quite innovative with it. We're not just looking at people engaging in sport for sport's sake. We're looking at an activity, but we're also looking at broader issues like tackling discrimination. We've also got, as part of the sports strategy, £3 million, which has come from the Young Londoners Fund, which means we're looking quite specifically at tackling youth violence. And what's important about that is that we're bringing groups of young people together, getting them to engage in sport, but also addressing some of the barriers or some of the triggers that lead them to being vulnerable, to being at risk of criminal activity. So it's an ambitious strategy, but we think it's the right way to try to address some of those broader issues that we have.
Well, of course, this is all very refreshing, and many of the things you talked about link up with the NHS. And of course, the NHS is very keen to increase activity. So what discussions have you had to align the objective of the NHS with your strategy?
Okay, can I say, we probably have, and I was asking, Simon's been here a long time, and I was asking Simon whether, in his experience, the GLA sports team and the health team had worked more closely together. And the good news is no, they're working very closely together. Dr. Yvonne Doyle, who's my public health advisor, sits on Sports England, and I'll let Simon talk about some of the really close work that's taking place, because you're right, obesity, overweight, mental health, all these are linked. So Simon, do you want to talk about sort of...
Yeah, I mean, so Yvonne Doyle sits on the board of London Sport, and I mean, one good example has been alluded to already by the Mayor and by Debbie is through mental health. We haven't funded anything on that specifically before, so through Thrive London, we will do something through that. That has NHS staff obviously involved with it. There's a whole range of activity going on social prescribing at the moment, and we've funded a sport tech project actually in West London on that very issue on social prescribing. So there are new conversations happening around sport and health, and we need to do more on that, and we will.
Good, well, that's very good. And just finally, of course, playing sport can bring people together, but they can also reinforce divides. Most sports are gender split, right? So, and for example, the women's teams get less funding than the men's teams in sport. How will we address those issues?
Well, it's horses for courses. I mean, one of the things that Debbie refers to, I'll bring Debbie back again, is to talk about the Muslim girls' fence, but also how we know there are too many, particularly teenage girls, who become inactive for a variety of reasons, and that's an issue for us in relation to making sure that young Londoners, particularly girls/young women, are active. Do you want to talk about some of the work we're doing there?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really important question, and I think through the community sports element, so through Sports Unite, and the Mayor mentioned the Muslim Girls Fence. What's important about the projects that we're trying to fund is addressing that whilst we acknowledge that generally in sport there is a disparity in the attention, the funding that women's sport receives in relation to sport that men play. Often there are situations where women want to engage in sport together, and if we want to try to best develop strategies for tackling why women and girls are not as active as they could be, we need to take the lead from them, and projects which are gender specific can work for particular groups of young women. It helps to increase their confidence and helps them to engage more effectively. So I think we need to be mindful of making sure that we develop projects which are about the people that we're trying to support, and if it is something which is specific to them, then we should try to support them and encourage them to engage in those sorts of activities.
Great, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Oh, thank you, Chair. My question goes back to sport. And much is mentioned in the strategy about your ambitions and your working with Sports Unite. So can you just tell us, like, who's in the grouping of Sports Unite? Anyone who knows the answer?
Yeah. I mean, Sport Unites is the name of the programme. London Sport is an organisation that we work very closely with. It is funded primarily by Sport England, but the board of London Sport, which is an independent body with independent trustees, but crucially, the chair and 2 trustees are appointed by the mayor, with further trustees appointed by Sport England and London Council. So it's a network. The point of it is to try and exploit the networks in London through one organisation. If you're familiar with the County Sport Partnership network in London, this is the London equivalent, if you like, of the County Sport Partnership, and it brings together organisations, local authorities, schools, and others, private sector, in one place. So there's representation on that board.
And is that the body that will be receiving £8.8 million?
No, that's
so that's the body I'm after, Sports Unites.
Yeah, the Sports Unites is the name of the programme that we're running.
Sorry, Jeanette,
It's not clear in the strategy, that's why I'm asking.
So we have £8.8 million in City Hall that we will give out, and the name of the programme is called Sports Unites.
Separate to?
Correct. That's the structure, this is the funding.
Right, okay. So going back to this funding that you'll be giving out, a lot has been said about volunteering in sports, and a lot has been said, and the strategy talks about its focus on community sports, but around that is a huge need in terms of more coaches, more access to healthy food, more support with local sports clubs. How are you going to identify those specific needs in order to be able to raise the capacity building that you talk about and the further full engagement of all Londoners?
I mean, I think your question gives me a chance to thank the thousands of volunteers who do such a huge amount in our city in this area. Members of my family are coaches, whether it's in boxing or other things, and you all know people who give their time, who are inspirational role models, give their time to do this stuff. What we're trying to do in City Hall is help them be better coaches, but to encourage more people to be volunteers. Team London plays a huge role. It's very rewarding to be a volunteer, to give your time, but you're right, you've got to help people skill up. But there are other skills, from nutrition to other skills that we know that are needed as part of this area. I think if we're honest, we would love to do much more, but we can only do what our funding allows us to do. So Team London is doing a huge amount in relation to volunteering, which also helps with social integration going forward. And the funding we're given will enable those sports clubs that exist to scale up, but also we're keen to fund new coaches who otherwise won't get involved, whether it's to hire a community centre for 3 hours of fitness is really important. And how you define sports is important as well. And so we're trying to give small sums of money to starting up clubs to be volunteers, but also to support those clubs who are currently going. But you're right, we can't just be talking about the coaches, there's all the other things that go with it, from catering to nutrition, the help of sports clubs run. We can't do it all. What we can do is help capacity build. But also, Simon's point is really important. We don't want to duplicate funding. So if there's money available from Comic Relief or from Lottery or from Sports England. We will help groups signpost them. Some of this funding is very difficult to apply for. It's 34 pages. You can't do it. Some is very easy, and we can help those clubs get the funding.
There's just so much to do, and I'm looking forward to playing a role in the scrutiny of this as a member of the Economy Committee. But can I just finish and say we've heard a lot about role models today, and we've heard talk across the cultural piece of the modern high flyers. Would the Mayor agree with me there's also a need, and following on from the great work that's been done over the last year in terms of the centenary, for us to really look and acknowledge those champions and those role models within our communities? And will he be joining us later on this week when we launch our campaign to raise awareness about heroines within our communities?
Absolutely. Can I say, for every one elite athlete, there are hundreds of thousands who won't become elite athletes. So for every Nicola Adams, there's a Sadiq Khan. For every English netball team of women champions, there's Sadiq Khan. For every GB women's Olympic team, there's somebody who's an average hockey player. But the heroines are amazing, and some of the women in London who do sports not at elite level is really impressive. They are role models. As a father of two daughters, I know the huge role these heroines have to play in our society, and of course I will join with you and celebrate, and then particularly in this year when we commemorate 100 years since the first women got the right to vote, celebrate the progress made. We've got to commit though to redouble our efforts to end finally gender inequality, and some of the work Debbie's doing is particularly targeting those girls and young women who need our assistance to be the helping hand for them to be active and lead fulfilling lives.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Desai.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you about community pitches and the importance to your strategy? Just to give one example, many great things and indeed individuals have started from community pitches like the Flanders Field in his town, where Bobby Moore played for Leighton Schools, Barking Schools in the early 50s, and was indeed spotted by West Ham playing there in 1955. And Newham Cricket Club, of which I'm ex-president and ambassador, they play there with the help of Essex. How does your strategy help to maintain and improve such pitches?
So we're helping grassroots sports, like the ones you mentioned. We've also got a piece of work taking place, for example, in Crystal Palace, to see if we can keep that going in relation to a sports asset. The huge importance from the Olympians we watch, from Daley Thompson to Seb Coe and Steve Ovett and what Crystal Palace was. So you're right, we've got to make sure we invest in grassroots sports going forward.
Okay, very quickly, Newham, one of my boroughs, lost £1.9 million, has lost £1.9 million, 45% of the sport and leisure budget over the last, over recent times. I think it's over the last year or so. Clearly, money does help. And London boroughs have seen their sports funding cut by an average of 400,000 each since 2013.
Yeah.
What are you going to say about this?
Well, I mean, we can't replace the funding councils have lost because of central government cuts, and it doesn't matter what political party the council is. I don't like to criticise the councils, because I understand that a lot of their funding comes from central government. We'll do what we can with the Young Londoners Fund, with Sports Unite, with the community sports programme, but it simply won't fill the massive hole left behind by central government cuts.
Carolyn Pigeon has already asked you about West Ham United and the Players Project, fantastic project. Can I ask you to recommend that project to other clubs? We went down there, Gareth Bacon came, I think Susan Hall was there as well.
Absolutely.
Every player, unique project, has adopted a particular, I've got to pick a pitch because I'm an ambassador for the West Ham United Foundation.
Please do that, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Whittle.
Mr. Mayor, just going back briefly to the local part of the strategy, what can you as Mayor practically do to support our libraries? There's a reference to libraries here, support and funding. They're pretty beleaguered. But what actually, or maybe the Deputy Mayor, what actually can you do to preserve and actually help these vital
Really important question. And I mean, as you know, libraries are the responsibility of local councils. However, we have now added libraries and archives into the strategy. Our Culture at Risk office helps where libraries need help, and we're on the end of the phone to kind of give them support and advice, connect them up. And also the cultural infrastructure plan, which is this fantastic new digital open source cultural mapping that we will launch in the new year, also now includes libraries. So what we're looking at is greater intelligence and support tactically where we can, recognising that libraries are not our direct responsibility.
Sorry, did I misunderstand? You mean you're going to, there's going to be more of an emphasis on the digitalisation?
Yeah, so the cultural infrastructure plan is a brand new plan for London. And just to explain what it is, normally, you know, cities, they do plan how much transport they need, how much housing, how many school places, but they tend not to do it for cultural infrastructure.
Yeah.
But because we've got such kind of serious issues here around clubs, venues, artist studios, libraries, we have determined that we will now kind of map and plan for culture in a much more serious and strategic way. And the first thing we're doing is next year we'll be launching a fantastic digital map of all the cultural assets in the city, and that will include libraries. So for the first time we'll have really great intelligence about what's happening, and we'll be able to kind of target our resources and our support and advice around that.
Because if you're talking about social mobility and social inclusion, these are about one of the few places where you can do that.
Correct. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Can I say good libraries are also doing things like helping people get jobs, access to internet, a computer, homework clubs. And you're right. I mean, I remember, you know, when all of us were younger, there was really important social hubs for us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr. Mayor, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you supporting nudge tactics to encourage Londoners who don't regularly engage in sport to do so, please? And do you have plans to use the tube and bus network to raise awareness in this regard?
Good question. So a couple of things. So firstly, your first question is a key part of our sports strategy. Getting people who are currently not engaged in sports, not active, active. And that's why definition matters, particularly for London girls and young women. For a variety of reasons, they're not as active as they should be. And so some of the work Debbie and the team are doing is targeting our resources at people not previously engaged in sports. In previous content, we've talked about the obesity levels in London. 4 out of 10 Londoners are obese, overweight 8 to 10. This will help the daily mile in schools make a big difference. Your second question is really interesting. How can we use the assets we have to promote some of the sports taking place? So the large-scale events, the commercial events, think of baseball, American football, Premier League football, Wimbledon, they will hire some of the TfL estate to advertise, which is good, brings in revenues to TfL. We're given, under a deal made by the previous mayor, a percentage of, if you like, free space we can use. And we're pushing walking and cycling a lot. You know, not to become a Tour de France cyclist necessarily, but just to cycle for leisure and to walk for leisure, because that'll make a big difference in relation to making people more active, and that can get them into more sports as well. But any ideas you have are gratefully received. And for example, in your manner, QPR, we'll do some great work with QPR. We're giving them some funding as well. They themselves put in some funding to help your community get some of the benefits of a great club like QPR as well.
Thank you for that. And one of my residents came up with quite a wacky idea, but it may be worth looking at, trying to increase the number of people that don't stand on the right of the escalator on the underground and actually walk up the left. And I wondered whether TfL measure, Caroline Pidgeon probably knows the answer to this, but do we measure the figures in terms of station by station, in terms of trying to encourage people to move? I always walk up the escalator because I need to.
So can I tell you this? It's a really fascinating point. So what we're trying to do, I mean, people are smiling, but so we're trying to get this data out there. We open source data. Yeah. And so the idea is that we will have this. We have this data, by the way, in relation to we know how many passengers on a tube train by the weight, or passengers are where the exits are, and the idea is that Wizzy designers have an app, and you can, if you want to walk more or walk less, know where to go and stuff. And so we do encourage people to walk where they can. Sometimes it's easier said than done, and we know the benefits of being active and stuff. And so you're right. You'll remember the trial at Holborn, which depending how you look at it, was a success or not. And so we are trying. We do suck it and see, Tony. So any ideas you've got, we will try. They may sound wacky, but let's try them. Let's pilot them.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Hello, Ms. Smith. What exactly is your strategy going to do to increase employment in the creative industries, particularly in BME communities and struggling poor communities?
Yeah, good question. So just to give you an idea of employment as it is, 1 out of 6 jobs in our city, 1 out of 6 is in the culture and creative industries. It's the fastest growing sector by a country mile. So it's really important to invest in culture. So those who criticise us for investing in culture don't understand what's going on here. And so the reason why it's important to deal with the pipeline going through is a question Florence asked in relation to the fruits of these jobs aren't being shared equitably across our city. So Justin referred to Back2, a good example of good works of trade unions, by the way, which you'll enjoy. I launched with them at the National Coliseum 3 weeks ago a scheme the trade union have drawn up with commercial theatre and funded theatre to get more diversity in theatre, both on stage, but also, as Justin was referring to, the jobs that are off stage, lighting, costumes, production, writing, etc. And what they're going to do, the theatres that sign up to this, and we're going to name and praise them, is assess the scheme they've got, come up with a plan, and then measure the progress they make. To give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, Sean, roughly speaking, only 23% of theatre staff are BAME, 23% in London, against a population of 40%, economically active 33%. It's not because they're not talented, it's about having access. And there are other examples I can give you of work we're doing in relation to getting BME Londoners to have access to these great jobs going forward.
And that's a funded scheme or just a participation?
The Back2 scheme is the trade union scheme, and the theatres are signed up to that. There's no need for funding because the theatres see the economic benefit of having a more diverse workforce. So the likes of Adrian Lester were there at the launch as well, who's an award-winning actor. But so mainstream theatres understand the benefits. The funding bit comes from Arts Council. So what we've done with the Arts Council is make sure, it's a question that Caroline asked about procurement, as part of being a beneficiary of a grant, you sign up to certain things as Arts Council. But the great thing about this Back2 scheme, Power of Trade Unions, is they've got commercial theatres where there are no financial levers sign up to the scheme as well.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, in your strategy, you've said that no local authority or borough police team wants to see the closure of a successful venue or the imposition of licensing conditions that makes the business unviable. Bearing in mind you want to see a nighttime economy, what's your reaction to Hackney's action in banning fun after 11 p.m. at night?
You made me cough. I'm not sure if I'd characterise Hackney's policy as banning fun, but I think it's a point Susan made in her opening. There is a balance to be struck between the needs of the nighttime economy, but also the legitimate concerns residents have, and squaring that circle is really important. And the same applies, by the way, to the night tube. We understand the benefits of the night tube, but we've got to balance the needs of noise with residents. So look, Hackney are trying to grapple with having a thriving nighttime economy, and arguably they've got one of the best night life offers of any council in London, but also with making sure they address the concerns, the legitimate concerns some residents have as well. And Amy's been down to Hackney to meet with the council, the residents, but also those that run the nighttime venues. And I think a combination can be reached.
So you're supportive of that Hackney's curfew?
Well, it's not a curfew. What it is an accommodation being reached between the council, the businesses, the residents, and the licensing authorities as well, including the police. And I think that sort of accommodation is what you want in a global city.
So you're supportive of Hackney's strategy?
I mean, I support the accommodation where you try and square the circle of the needs of residents, the needs of those businesses, rights operators, the legitimate requirements of the council to balance those needs, but also making sure that in a city where people live as well as need to sleep, but also have fun as well, you've got to try and achieve a balanced exercise.
And that's kind of what licensing committees do anyway, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's kind of what licensing committees do anyway.
Oh, but often we've seen the value. I'll give you one example in relation to a high-profile case where a couple of years ago, Fabric, the nightclub, a decision was taken to close that as a consequence of conversations had between people for good intentions, councillors, the police, nightclub owners, patrons, residents, coming together to find an accommodation where Fabric has reopened. And so I think accommodations can be reached, but it's about realising that people come at it from different angles. And so we don't want if you did a word association, to associate, you know, nighttime economy with antisocial behaviour. That's why these conversations that we have are really important.
What specific targets, excuse me, I was out late last night experiencing the culture of a karaoke bar off Regent Street.
I'm glad it was lawful. I'm glad it was lawful.
Sorry, and that was quite late. What specific targets, key performance indicators and measurables are in the culture strategy?
Yeah, there are some in the implementation plan. There are some metrics given.
Just to cut it short, what you've got is baselines but no targets.
Do you want to answer? Yeah, so in terms of the measures, every programme we're running has its own bespoke measures. So, you know, if you think about, take the Creative Industries investment programme, each of those strands of work has measures built into that grant agreement. So, you know, in terms of the work we do with Film London, their target and KPI is to generate £1 billion of investment. To take one from British Fashion Council, our support to them needs to deliver 97 million in orders from the various fashion weeks. So each programme will have its own KPIs and targets built into that, and that is all public information. Lots of the new programmes, we're doing a lot of work that we've never done before. Brand new Cultural Seeds programme, brand new Creative Enterprise programme, brand new London Borough of Culture programme. So all of these brand new programmes have got independent evaluations built alongside them. And then, of course, every month the team produce KPIs and dashboards which all get fed into the quarterly reports to the Assembly's Budget Committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Time is up. Very unusually, before dismissing you, as Chairman, I want to raise something which the Assembly is doing, which has been hinted at by the Deputy Chairman. You will know that we are proposing a new system of blue plaques because we think that the current system is very restrictive, i.e. they have to go onto the buildings where people actually lived and they have to have been dead for 20 years. And I wonder if, on behalf of the Assembly, I can solicit your support for the Assembly's proposal, not only to have a less restrictive criteria, but to erect blue plaques or something similar on areas where important things may have happened. For example, Cable Street, you've already mentioned women, Cable Street, the Battle of Turnham Green, where Wilkes promulgated the way he thought that government could be conducted. So, in short, Mr. Mayor, is the Assembly likely to have your support for this?
If I can respond to that, I mean, I think what we can't endorse is a competitive scheme kind of against English heritage. I think our preferred approach is to work with English heritage to support them to grow and produce more blue plaques. I mean, they themselves are aligned with us in that we need more, you know, kind of celebration of the diverse communities in London that have made a significant difference. You know, if you look at the number of women on the blue plaques, it's something like 9%. If you look at BAME contributions, again, very, very low. So together we are working to kind of increase, you know, the kind of celebration of all Londoners who've made a difference to this city. But I think the other thing I'd say is we're looking at other ways in which we can celebrate the contribution of Londoners to this city, you know, through public art, through murals, through street names, as well as blue plaques. So I think there's lots more work to be done.
And you endorse that, Mr. Mayor, do you?
I always endorse what Justine says, Chair. But I think the point that you make is really important. We've got to celebrate success, and Jeanette articulated this previously. There are too many great Londoners who aren't celebrated, and by celebrating them, it inspires others. And you're right about London's geography as well, Chair. There are great acts that have begun in our city we should celebrate, and so how we do that is a discussion to be had. But I think the idea is a cracking idea from the Assembly, and one that I think is really important, and it shows the power of us recognising the contribution Londoners have made from London that have actually improved the lives around the world, by the way, not just in London.
Okay. Right, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. I now Move to debate the motion on the agenda, please, set out in my name, that the Assembly notes the draft culture strategy. In a moment, I'll ask members whether or not there are any amendments to that motion or any other motions to be moved. Can I remind members that in accordance with Standing Order 3.19F and the provisions of Section 42B of the GLA Act 1999 as amended, any motion proposing rejection of the strategy requires at least 2/3 of Assembly members present and voting to vote in favour in order for the motion to be carried. Abstentions do not count as a vote against and so are excluded from the calculation of the 2/3 majority. Any other motion requires a simple majority of members to be carried but is not binding on the Mayor. Can I ask, well, I know because it's already been tabled, whether or not there are any amendments to the motion that we note the draft culture strategy. And I have a motion which I understand is being proposed by Assembly Member Bailey.
An amendment.
Yes, an amendment to my motion.
Okay. Good.
Well, I'm calling the amendment. So go. Well, the motion is... Oh, you haven't had the notice of the... Well, perhaps you can explain it to Assembly Member Bailey as we go along.
No, I don't want to read that. Let them read it. What? They need time to read the motion. Haven't seen it before. The amendment. Haven't seen it before.
Haven't you got it? You've all got it, haven't you? Yes, they've all got it, Sean.
Are you ready, Caroline? Have you read it? Sean? Listen, as we all know, London's culture and sports offer is world class. It's very important to us. It's an important part of being a Londoner. It's a big draw. It's what makes London London. A lot of international people come here to get involved in whatever we have to offer, from sport to culture, you know, from the pub to the opera is why people come to London often. And Londoners ourselves experience these things and dearly love them. So clearly a cultural strategy is a good thing. The cultural part of this strategy, though, is very poor when you talk about performance indicators, milestones, those kind of things. The sports part fares better, but the cultural part has very little of it in there. And without these milestones, it's going to be very hard for this Assembly to take into account or call the Mayor to account for any of the measures that he has put in here. And I believe that we need that in order to look at what the Mayor's done and hold him to account. It's about the role of this chamber and the role that we provide to Londoners, the service we provide to Londoners. If I go to an example, if you look at Policy 12, it says the Mayor will help Londoners to get employment in the creative industries. And then it says he will undertake or has taken these actions, and there's a list below. But most of those actions have no KPI. They don't say when they will be delivered, they don't say how much they'll cost, they don't say who they're for, they don't say how it will be delivered. So how we in this chamber, and by extension Londoners, will be able to hold the Mayor to account is beyond me. And I'm happy to have a suggestion if you feel you know why. And one of the key weaknesses for this strategy and many others, earlier on, Caroline Russell talked about the fact that this strategy was linked to other strategies the Mayor has, which is great. But for me, the link is that there is no KPIs. Many of these sessions, we've had many plenaries, we've always asked for what is the KPIs. And the link here is no milestones, no what, when, and why, and for who. And that, I think that is very important. We need to know that to perform our function. Again, I'll end on this point. Without these KPIs, without these milestones, how are we to hold the Mayor to account? How are we to see that that public money is being spent in an effective way? The key weakness of many of the Mayor's strategies are we have spending money as an outcome. That can never be the outcome. It's the effect that money has, the positive uplift or not that money has. That's what we need to look at. So I commend this amendment to you. Again, I will end by saying a cultural strategy is clearly a great thing, but a strategy with no milestones, or let me rephrase that, with very few milestones, is useless to us in London because we can't hold the Mayor to account. And the amount of money being spent means we need to perform that function properly. Thank you.
I have a note that Assembly Member Boff is seconding this. Do you wish to second now?
Reserve my right, please, Chair.
Okay. Assembly Member Duval.
I'm slightly bemused in standing up and trying to address this motion because even though I was in between doing things and listening, I heard explicitly that every programme has got a KPI. And there are some elements in the strategy. So I don't understand how we've arrived, or a certain section of our Assembly has arrived at this view that this is why this strategy needs to be rejected. If anything, this strategy builds on the work of the previous mayor. I think that's been acknowledged by the current mayor. This is a direction of travel that we, at different various times, have agreed. Of course, there's more we'd want to see in different strategies and more emphasis on one part or the other. But to reject the strategy on this premise would just be wrong and inaccurate, to be honest, in terms of what we've heard and what is the reality of this. So therefore, we on this side will not be supporting this motion. And just to give an heads up, it might have been just advisable that if you talk to us, because there may have been something that we could have united round to at least say something about this strategy or not, if there was a particular emphasis we wanted to do. But on this basis, I find it really hard, and I'm struggling to see where this would be fair and proper and right to reject this strategy based on this.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. I am rather surprised by this. I mean, obviously, I have shared some criticisms in the past, and indeed here, about the lack of KPIs, but to say there's none at all is ridiculous. And I think the real concern I have is that if this motion were passed, how long would it take to redraft the strategy, bearing in mind the importance of getting on with it? If we take, for example, the public health approach in relation to knife crime, one of the important contributions to that is diversion through culture, through sport and so forth. How long is that going to get put off as a result of this motion should it be passed? And then we hear about KPIs. If we take the Museum of London, it's a place I know quite well because one of my voluntary activities is chair of the Council of British Archaeology in London, so I'm there regularly. They've got a major programme underway, but it's still at high-level development. To start to say, oh, we want a specific date by when you're going to double children going is ridiculous because it's still a high-level part of the strategy. They're still working out what's going to go where in the new museum, never mind actually starting the building work. Now, that is crazy. We have a KPI, which is double the number of kids going. Frankly, you couldn't double the number of kids in the existing building because it's heaving already. This is designed towards the new museum. So that's an example of how we've already got a KPI, but it's got to be sensible about how you actually implement it. I think that if we take, for example, London and Partners, we've had criticism of London and Partners across the chamber. Now we've got London and Partners documents, which are being worked through in huge pile. That's got to be worked through before you could actually analyse this sort of thing. It's important that we actually get on with things rather than let, I think the Prime Minister's been talking about this in relation to Brexit, rather than let the excellent get in the way of what's good. And I think this is a very good strategy, and I think that this motion should not be approved.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what the two Assembly members on the other side of this chamber have just been saying in terms of how spending our morning listening to the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor talking about how this whole strategy was going to be measured, the benefits for Londoners of a strategy that is all about increasing participation and access to the arts and to sport is absolutely immeasurable across all areas of London's work. But in particular, I just wonder whether maybe none of you even looked at Appendix 5, which on page 16 has got a whole load of outcomes indicators and baselines that we can hold them to account on. So, sorry. I just think that you're picking holes. We certainly won't be supporting your motion.
Absolute garbage. Assembly Member Arnold.
Oh, Chair, I just want to add my support to what my colleagues have said. And just to say, the points about holding the Mayor to account are quite right. That's our job. But this isn't just the only forum. So we have received this document. The in-depth work will take place in committee. And I would ask my colleague to join us on the Economy Committee, where this will be a major part of the work in the coming year.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff, do you want to second now?
Yeah, yes, please. perhaps I can be helpful here. The cultural strategy is really important to this city. It talks about tackling, for example, violence against women. It's something that I would want to see extended within any future strategy once the Mayor gets to grip with his violence reduction strategy. It talks about increasing participation in the cultural life of this city. It's very important, and the points are very, very well made if you go to, for example, the South Bank and just work on the basis of skin tone of the people who attend. You know we've got a problem. And the role of sport in addressing health inequalities. These are important issues for young people. And so therefore, is it not reasonable that we want to know what success looks like when we're trying to address those issues? Is it not reasonable for us to, at a time when we are supposed to be authorising a statutory strategy, that we could ask, how does success feel? What does it look like? In a few years' time, where will we be? And much as somebody mentioned, Justine Simons mentioned KPIs, she didn't share them with us. In this document, the implementation document, this is a list of baselines, and I address what Assemblymember Russell was saying. The document's there, it's baselines. There's no targets. There's nothing in there to tell us what the smell of success smells like. And yet, so this group wants to, and added on to the lack of targets that we've had in previous strategies. Absolutely the same with the economic development strategy. Absolutely no targets. Lots of lovely words that we could all agree with, no targets. And so if the Mayor is starting to treat us as just a rubber stamping exercise, and we can see that by his actions this morning when he told everyone he was publishing this cultural strategy without the courtesy of coming to this group first, of this assembly first. Now, we can either encourage that attitude, in which case we'll just rubber stamp everything he throws at us, or we can actually stand up for the rights of this assembly to question the Mayor and hold him to account. And if we fail to pass this motion today, honestly, we're going to say to him, not that interested in targets, not that interested in achieving things, just interested in the words.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Bailey, do you wish to sum up?
I'd just like to endorse everything that my colleague, Assemblymember Boff, has said. And what's really, really important, just saying something, just having these warm words, doesn't help people on the ground make these things happen. As someone who's a youth worker and continues to do youth work, if someone funds you, you have to know what they want you to do, or they're setting you up to fail. If you run a sports program or you run some kind of cultural program, what are they asking you to do? That has to be part of what's going on here. And the same happens for us. We fail if we don't have anything to ask the Mayor, if we don't have any KPIs to hold him against. And a baseline and a target of spending the money is not a milestone, it's not a KPI. It gives you no idea of what success looks like. And no, I addressed the points that Andrew Dismal made. No, everybody's not sitting around waiting for this to happen. The work has not halted just because this strategy has not been agreed. The work goes on. But any new work, any quality work, excuse me, will need a KPI to understand what it's about. Where does its place sit in this blizzard of lovely words? Much of this we agree with. The sentiment is correct. But again, without any KPI, or the very few it has, how do we look at success? How do we know who to fund? How do we know which bits of work are impactful for Londoners' lives, for the benefit of their lives? So again, I commend you to support this, because it's about our role and it's about delivering the best for Londoners. Even if the sentiment is right, it means very little. And again, I commend you to the example I used of Policy 12. Lots of lovely words, very, very thin on how, when, and for who. These things are important because they impact the lives of Londoners. I commend you to vote for this.
Those in favour of the amendment in the name of Assemblymember Bailey, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favour of the amendment, Chairman.
Those against?
12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
The amendment falls. Those in favour of the substantial motion that the strategy is noted, please show. Well, I suppose I really have to, don't I?
Your motion.
18 for Chairman.
Okay. The motion is carried. Date of next meeting is scheduled to be Mayor's Question Time on Thursday, 20th December, here in the Chamber at 10 o'clock. There is no urgent business, and when I can find the thing, I'm told the picture has been abandoned.
Oh, okay.
Yes, hurrah!